school district regular board meeting. It's nice to have so many people here. And we will now do the meeting.
Yes.
New set, we're getting adjusted.
Okay, so tonight we have the July 2021 financial report, as well as an update on the state funding with the new funding formula that was just passed by the state legislature. So jumping into the July financial report, July is the first month of our fiscal year, so we only have month-to-date balances to look at compared to prior year. So the estimates for August through June are represented by the blue bars on this graph here. So for July, our ending cash for the month of July was 7.4 more than July of last year. And that is due to the phase-in of the income tax as well as our carryover cash balance from prior year. So looking at revenue for the month of July, we break down revenue into three categories: local, state, and other revenue. Local revenue, again, is up over prior year, and that's largely due to a timing issue between the July and October income tax payments. If you recall last year, the tax filing deadline was pushed back, so that caused a difference in the timing of how much we would receive in July versus October. On state revenue, that is down over prior year. I'll get into explaining how the new funding formula works, but in general, we're being funded for students who we educate, and there will be an offsetting decrease in expense. But in general, state revenue will be about the same as prior year. And then all of our revenue includes a return of advance, which is just an accounting adjustment related to our reimbursement-based grants. Then moving on to July expenditures. In the salary and benefits category, last July we had a double up on our insurance payments due to a payroll and accounting software conversion. And so it was necessary to have two payments in 1 month. So after we adjust for that double insurance payment last year, our total expenses are actually down over prior year by about $24,000. And then in the purchase service category, you can see we're down about $50,000 over prior year, and that's where we no longer will have transfers to community schools and open enrollment to other school districts and scholarships. So that's the offsetting expense that has gone down for the decrease in state revenue. And that is all for the general fund. Moving on to our COVID-related expenses. So we have several grants that we have received over the past year and a half. So the latest here is the ESSER 3 fund. So the first bar graph, that's the one there in the middle. into more detail on that on the next slide. So here we break down how we've spent each of these funding sources. Last school year, we had the ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 funds, and a lot of that went to some additional staffing positions that we added, as well as sub-teachers. There was building stuff in each classroom, cleaning services, cleaning supplies, additional custodial services, as well as some storage and moving expenses. Going into this year, those ESSER 3 funds will largely be used for some facilities improvements specifically related to HVAC. So improving air quality in our buildings, as well as flooring projects, so trying to eliminate carpet in classrooms so it's easier to keep clean, as well as furniture to increase social distancing. And then there's a 20% required set aside for learning loss recovery initiatives such as credit recovery and summer intervention. So we have 20% of the funds set aside for those services. And then we have our cash reconciliation, which is just required for audit purposes. And that is the end of the July financial report. Now I'm going to move into kind of a recap of where we've come from with state funding and where we're headed. So this is a timeline just to kind of give some background of the last 2 years and what our funding looked like. So in July of 2019, we were flat funded. So there was no formula. It was just you're going to get the same amount of funding that you received the year before, regardless of the number of students that you had. Then fast forward all the way to May of 2020. So we've already incurred a majority of our expenses, and suddenly our funding is cut almost 90%. And then we had no idea what was going to happen at the time that we're trying to put together our budget, finalize budget numbers for the year. So then July 1st, we found out we're going to be flat funded at those reduced FY20 levels. Fast forward to December of 2020, we did receive about 4% of that funding back for last fiscal year. So that was helpful. And then finally in this past July, House Bill 110 passed. So that is what we're going to jump into next.
Those gyrations are based on uncertainty in the state budget and so forth, and so when things were questionable last night, they cut off that almost 9%, and when it looked like they were getting more promising, they added back in House for.
Yep, all of that was tied to tax, primarily income tax performance at the state level. Okay, so moving on to House Bill 110, the Fair School Funding Plan. So the big difference here with this formula compared to prior formulas is that it's an input-based method. So it's actually calculating what it costs to educate a student. There was a work group of local superintendents, treasurers, and specifically Mike Sobel, the previous treasurer here for Granville Schools, was highly involved with this plan. So a lot of work went into this over the last 3 years to come up with a logical, reasonable, predictable mechanism for funding our schools. The most important thing is that it uses current data, it uses current enrollment, and it directly funds those students who we are educating. So there's two main components to the formula. There's base cost, and then there's local capacity. So how much we can fund at the local level versus the state level of that base cost. So base cost for personnel is primarily determined based on these ratios. I just gave an example for the grade level teaching positions, what those ratios would look like. There's ratios for all of the different positions in the school district, so this is just an example of some of those. And then it applies an average teacher salary to those ratios and adds on top of that a a 16% benefit factor, as well as a health insurance allocation. That was a statewide average across all districts, all plans, so family, single, to come up with a weighted allocation for health insurance. And then on top of that, there's a couple of additional components, things like sub-teachers, so we're being funded 5 days for every teacher that the formula calculates at $90 a day for those subs, professional development allocation based on the number of teachers as well. And then we just add up all of those components, and that's our total personnel-based cost. So, it looks very good, but I just threw out some numbers to provide some context. So it's just illustrative. It's not exactly what our numbers would be. It's just to provide some context for the formula.
So those student-teacher ratios are not Granville student-teacher ratios, those are the ones that are used in the formula.
Correct.
And that average salary is not Granville average salary, although it's probably not far on that in terms of state average, that's state average.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep, that's right. And also with that, this is not saying that we have to have 24 students in our kindergarten classroom. This is just what's being used to determine the funding. And then it's up to each local district to determine how they want to use those funds. Okay, next is the non-personnel components to base cost. So there's various categories here, extracurricular, safety and security, supplies, technology, but largely this component is building operations. And that was a statewide average over the last 6 years of spending per square foot. And then for the total non-personnel, we just sum up all of those components, and that goes into non-personnel. And then to calculate total base cost, you just add those two components and then translate that into a per pupil allocation, so divided by your total enrollment. So in this example, that will come out to about $7,150. So each district's base cost per pupil is going to be slightly different, depending on their square footage, their student makeup, whether they have more elementary students versus high school students, all of those components. But for this example, it's about $7,150.
But there's not an adjustment in the formula for local cost of living that's adjusted by district or state, region, and so forth? Okay.
Okay, next, then we calculate what our local share of that base cost would be. So 60% is total property valuation, and then the other 40% is made up of two income measures. So 20% is total federal adjusted gross income, and then 20% total median adjusted gross income. And the reason for the two different metrics there, the median provides some stability year over year, because federal adjusted gross has the ability to fluctuate significantly in any individual year due to sale of business, lottery winning, those kinds of one-time earnings would significantly increase the total federal adjusted gross. And then total median adjusted gross income is calculated by taking the median income times the number of state tax returns, and that is the final 20%. So then taking those three amounts, adding those together, and equating that to a per pupil amount, that then is the local capacity per pupil. So if you compare the 234,000 to the 7,000 on the previous slide, you're kind of wondering, okay, those two things don't equate. Well, the final piece then
It's
is,
not per pupil, right? It's not 200,000 people.
It's-
It's just 200,000.
yeah,
Divided by the number of pupils.
right. And then you apply this capacity multiplier to it, and that puts it in terms of how much will be applied to base cost. So, the local to statewide median ratio is the first metric, and depending on how you rank in that measure if you're in the top 40 in the state, which Granville will be in the top 40, the multiplier is 2.5%. And then anything below that is based on a sliding scale. So, sorry, it's harder than so then you apply the 2.5% to the number from the previous slide, and you get about 5,868,000. And that's the local share of base cost. So then, comparing that to the 7,150, the difference is what the state will fund, which is $1,281, or about 18%. So that is what, again, this is not Granville specific numbers. We haven't received our funding yet this year based on this formula, but this is just illustrated to give you an idea of kind of what it would look like with similar demographics.
And that might not be too different than what our numbers will look like.
Yeah.
And that number changes drastically across the state based primarily on local capacity.
Correct.
But certainly none of the school districts educate for $7,000 per pupil, right? So that's just a base number that they use to drive our wealth factor, if you will, and that's what they do.
Yes. And that is for a regular education student, so your typical student. And then there's categorical funding that is layered on top of that. And that's where some of the additional expense comes in when you think of a typical cost per student. So to get into that, I'll jump to the next slide. So there's 3 groups: special education, ELL, and career tech. Those all take the statewide base cost times your state share, which is that 18% we saw on the previous slide, times the categorical weight. So depending on the classification of the student in each of these categories, there's a different weight associated with it. And then we multiply that by your enrollment in each particular category. Then there is a gifted allocation. And this, unlike the rest of the formula, does actually have to be spent on gifted services. And we will be required to report out on that. So there's an allocation for identification, there's a component for referral, there's funding for a coordinator at a specific ratio, as well as intervention and professional development for those teachers. Then 2 more components of categorical funding. Disadvantaged pupil impact aid is calculated similarly to how it is now. So this is the district's percentage of economically disadvantaged compared to the statewide average. And then there's a per pupil amount. This year it will be $272, and then that's going down to $293 next year. And then transportation, there were a lot of changes here that will benefit Granville. So the first one is that all students who are riding the bus will be funded. So that's going to include any preschoolers that we're transporting and any students K-12 who we're transporting, even those that live under 1 mile from the building. Previously, those were not funded. So anybody who's riding the bus will be funded. We'll also receive weighted funding for students attending community schools and non-public schools. So there's acknowledgement there that it's more costly to transport those students since you don't have the efficiencies that you have in our district buildings. Next, we will be able to use either the higher of our AM or PM counts. So they found when doing the research for this formula that some districts see higher numbers in the afternoon. Parents may drop students off on their way to work, and then the kids ride the bus home. So we'll be able to use the higher of those 2. And then this next point will be helpful as well. So then the higher of either your state share percentage, so again that 18% that we saw a couple slides ago, or 29% for FY22, the current year, and then that'll go up to 32% next year. So we'll be getting a higher percentage of the cost for transporting students as well. And then special education will be based on our actual expenses related to providing those services. So all the changes for transportation will be helpful to us. That's probably where we would see a majority of the increase in our funding.
Is the categorical funding in special ed allocated and people ratio required there, or is that not a scale?
Yes, so let me jump back. So that bullet point here, the average statewide base cost is multiplied by our state share. So it does take the 18%. Okay, and then the final piece of the formula is the expense side. So previously, we would receive funding for all resident students. Now we're only receiving funding for those who are educating. So we will receive less revenue, but we will also have less expense, as I mentioned during the financial report. And again, this is a formula used to calculate revenue, but it does not determine how these funds are spent, with the exception of gifted. There's some student wellness and success funds, and then the economically disadvantaged. And then the final point here is that the student wellness and success funds, these were previously reported in a separate fund outside of the general operating fund, so they were not included in our 5-year forecast. So that will be another component that's going to make it a little challenging this year doing a year-over-year comparison, but just something to keep in mind that we'll have that revenue and expense in the forecast going forward.
Could you just briefly touch on how the change, like, we were previously given the money for community schools and all those other things, funneled through us, and then we paid it out too. So can you just sort of explain how that changed?
Yep. So previously we would receive, the state would send us a net dollar amount, but we would have to record the revenue for the students who are attending community schools or who are open enrolled to another school district. And then before those funds even come to us, the state would take those, redirect them to where those students are being educated. And then we would have to record that as an expense on our books. So it was essentially an in and out. We were just kind of a pass-through agency for those funds. So now those funds are just going to go directly to where those students are being educated. It's more direct, it's more clear too on our books that we're not having the revenue for those students, and then the offsetting expense just makes things a little bit cleaner. Okay, and then the final piece here, to wrap things up, what does this mean for Granville? So overall, it means very little change in state revenue. However, we are very excited to have a formula. We are not flat funded. This is actually a formula that I can try to articulate to you in about a 10 to 15 minute presentation that has some logic behind it. So that's really exciting for us. However, Granville is still going to be viewed as a wealthy district under this formula, which means we're still going to be heavily reliant on local revenue sources. So that makes the renewal of the income tax next fall vital. So I will show you on the next slide here. This is a breakdown just from the May 5-year forecast of our revenue sources, and adding up all of the local sources compared to state, it's about a 75-25 split. So if that includes the income tax. And if we take that out of the equation, looking here, that's where the income tax renewal is represented by the kind of orangish bar out in 2025. That's when expenditures significantly exceed revenue. That's the gray bar is higher than the black bar there. And what that means is at that point you're living off your cash balances, which is never a situation that you want to be in. And that's when cash would significantly drop off. So in wrapping things up, that's not on the slide. We're very excited about the funding formula, but again, the income tax is going to be vital to continue the hard work that we've done over the last several years, being good stewards of those funds. Any other questions or comments?
It's a little hard to get excited about state school funding formulas, but I'm really excited about this. I mean, it's not because we're going to get more money. You know, Granville's first district, we're not going to get a lot of sympathy and all of a sudden get a lot more. But the clarity that it's driven around the state is huge, right? And the clarity for ourselves being able to forecast what changes in enrollment, how, development and the number of students impacts our true financial situation is finally clear, right? And if they can stick with this, which they've committed to, and this is huge for us. And so I think just from a forecast predictability perspective, it's great. But anytime you change metrics, including how you pay for community schools and other schools and things like that, it's confusing, right? And I think we need to really work hard on clarity for year-over-year metrics, right? And how you do accurate comparisons, per pupil and so forth, because, we're the home to the community to really explain why we spend what we spend, right? And if you just go out and look at numbers on some site, or if you look at our numbers, they're going to change. Our expenses are going to change, our revenue is going to change, we have other special case things. So I guess I just encourage you to keep thinking creatively about how we communicate clearly, as well as understand ourselves, right, the true impact of the decisions that we make financially. So it's fantastic. I actually got a formula on that. I'm actually really excited. But it's still a little confusing, right? A little bit better right now, but still it's going to take some monitoring and work to make sure we do it right.
Yeah, the November forecast, communication around that will be vital, and I think we'll spend a lot of time doing comparisons of, okay, here's what the forecast looks like, here's what the year-over-year comparison would be if, all of the components were the same. So we'll work on some visuals and some communication on that for sure.
One thing that I would add as well is, not for tonight, but for another day, just talking a little bit about what was also included in this House bill, which was, direct funding of charter schools and parochial schools at a significantly higher level, without a weighted metric, where we might receive anywhere from $1,200 to $1,800 per student. Some of the parochials and charter schools around us will receive upwards of $5,800 or up to $7,500. So I don't think the community typically understands that that's local tax revenue going to parochial and private schools, and I think that's an important conversation to have at some point, not for tonight. I understand. Okay, I'm going to stand up because I like to sing. So, let's see if I can do this well. Glenn, tell me if I'm still in sight or not. But I wanted to start by saying thank you for coming. And it sounds cliche, but we say very often that it takes a village. And we joke because we live in a very nice little village. But it's true. And I think that going into these conversations, we have to realize that we are all part of the same community, and we do need to unite around things that challenge us as a community, just like we do in every other situation that we face as an entity. So I know this topic is polarizing, but I also want us to move past the polarization to get back to what grounds us, which is being a part of this community. I've been in education for 27 years. I thought last year was difficult. Last year was a breeze compared to the conversations that we've been having just recently and the fluctuation that's been occurring in some of the guidance that we've been receiving. I've joked, but it's not really funny, that no COVID plan is written in pen, it's written in pencil because of the changing dynamics of what we're facing in a pandemic. And it's very much still true today, if not more true today. So we're continuing to do our best to educate your children in the best way possible. I think we were very successful last year, and I appreciate all the positive comments that we've received about what we did last year, but we're also trying to, even do better this year. So, it's true, all plans included in this presentation are subject to change based on changing conditions, policy, or guidance from various public authorities. And I can't tell you enough how important that statement is, because it literally changed this morning. So we had our presentation ready, and it changed this morning. So it could change next week. I'm not trying to be deceptive. I'm just trying to be realistic, that you need to understand that this is evolving and changing on a very rapid basis. So no COVID plans are written in pen. So we learned some things last year. Last year going into the pandemic, we were coming off of a spring where we were remote. And we said, okay, we want to do better than that. And I think we did. We erred on the side of getting as many kids into the school environment as possible. We educated about 20% or 80% of our students in person and about 20% in a remote setting. What I can tell you is that we learned that students need to be in a regular classroom setting. They need to have access to their peers. They need to have in-person contact with their teachers. That's an ideal setting for optimal learning to occur, not just academic, but social and emotional and mental health. Layered protections work in all classroom, all school-related environments, and we were able to limit the number of quarantines. We weren't able to do that significantly well at the beginning, but I think working with the Licking County Health Department, we were able to adjust and find some middle ground. And the quarantining and the layers of protection that we had in place were effective for us to have a school year, I would say, very different than most. So we learned from that. Throughout that process, we were utilizing the local data that the Licking County Health Department was funneling to us to drive our decision making. That was an absolutely essential collaboration between the health department and the schools, and it's not just Granville schools, it was all Licking County school districts. The social distancing parameter changing from 6 feet to 3 feet was done in Licking County first through that collaboration. And it was done early enough in the year that we were able to not have as many kids quarantining. So that collaboration we know is essential for us to move forward. So that's another guiding principle we have to rely on. We also obviously want Granville teachers teaching Granville curriculum to our students. We are going to have to be flexible and responsive. So we might be in a very different situation a month from now. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. Epidemiologists are looking at it all the time to say, where are we going to be in the future? But I think that we have a track record of being adaptable and nimble and being able to pivot when we have to pivot effectively in order to continue to educate our children. We have to be consistent in the implementation of safety protocols for students and staff, and I'm going to talk about those layers of protection and how they've adjusted for this school year. And then finally, our partnership with the health department is absolutely essential moving forward. So this is what I am recommending to the board tonight. We are strongly recommending that in alignment with the CDC guidance, the Ohio Department of Health, AAP, that students K-12 wear masks, regardless of their vaccination status. However, we are placing the responsibility on parents or guardians to use the resources that are available in this presentation. All these are hyperlinks so that when this presentation is on the website tomorrow. You can scroll through and see what the educational or medical experts are saying about this virus and the Delta variant, so that you can make an informed decision about what you're going to do with your children. So we are going to ask you to designate your child's mask status for the first quarter. The rationale for that, you'll see once you see the contact tracing requirements and the quarantining requirements that we are required to align with. So there are some benefits that are built into the contact tracing process and quarantining process that you need to be aware of before you make your decision on your individual children. There is a possibility that exists, and I'm asking, you'll see later, I'm asking for authorization tonight from the board that if the local data suggests that we need to go to a higher layer of protection like a mask mandate, that they grant me that authority now. And that's going to be something that will be based on local decisions and local data. We're not going to be listening to what's happening in Columbus or Cleveland. We are going to be listening to what's happening in Granville, 43023 and 43055. So we are going to contextualize that data to make sure that we are talking about what is happening in our schools. To that point, right now, this is the current vaccination data in Granville, 43023. We have the highest vaccination rate in Lincoln County at 68%. So we don't have what portion of 43055 is in our school boundary. The data was not available in that manner, but you can assume that 68 and some of the 50% are part of the Granville Schools boundary. We will continue to work in conjunction with the health department to review the data and determine the legally threat. And as I said, I'm going to be asking for authorization to do a mask mandate if that is necessary for us to stay in school. Because the other option is going remote. And I can tell you, I know everybody in this environment does not want that to happen. So again, our goal is to try and keep students in school. So where are we at right now? So we are increasing in the community of COVID positive, active COVID positive cases. So this is the calendar week, and the health department has agreed to give that to us every single week on Wednesday. It will be for the last 7 days. So we'll be looking backwards to make decisions moving forward. If you look, this is the total number of adults. This is the number of school-age students. So right now, there are 22 positive cases, 3 of which are school-aged. So last year at the same time, we were in a very similar place. So even though that's a trajectory up, we were at a very similar place from an active student case number. We weren't necessarily excellent at collecting that data back then, but I can tell you that from looking back at those weeks, I know how many cases we had leading into the school year, and it's very consistent.
Could you explain a little better what the red dot, blue bar,
Yeah.
and the red line are?
Yes. So
Where are we?
okay. So what Chad Brown at the health department has done is he took last year's data and created a baseline and said, okay, even though it's not 3 years worth of data or 10 years worth of data, 1 year is better than no data. And he said, I'm going to create a line or a trajectory based on where we were at last year. You can tell this was basically November through January. We had significant numbers of cases coming in, almost 147, 150 cases, active cases within a week. We were up in the range of 18 to 20 students across K-12 that were sick during those time frames. It was a very tenuous time. So this line is kind of where we were as a community as far as active cases. And then, but that is not the number of students or active school cases. It was aggregate. So we've broken it up, and now we're in the 31st week of the year, and we have 22 active cases. Total 19 are adults and 3 are school age. Obviously, you can't break that down any further without violating potential federal laws. So we are going to continue to look at this data to drive our decision making. So what other layers of protection are going to be in place that will sound familiar like we had last year? Obviously, we're strongly recommending for all students to wear masks, regardless of their vaccination status. That reduces the probability of being quarantined. The caveat to this is because we are a mass transit environment with a school bus, we do have to comply with federal law. I know that there was a lot of information floating around that the federal law didn't impact us at the local level. It does. And so we've checked that with our board attorneys, and they said it would be best to align with the federal mandate for transportation. Again, we will keep windows open. We will continue to do all the things that we do to try to make that ride as comfortable as possible for students. So that's the caveat to the strongly recommend for all. Again, parents will be required to designate their child's mask status. Vaccinations are still available to all people 12 and older. If you need to, you can contact the Lincoln County Health Department. They have been offering consistent vaccination clinics if you are so inclined. The other thing is most people are asking when might 5-year-olds and up have access to vaccinations. The best information that we have is that they are getting close, but it's probably going to be closer to December before anything comes down from the FDA that grants emergency approval. Personal hygiene with hand washing and hand sanitizer available. We are going to continue to do that. We have a lot of wipes still available from last year, so those are still going to be available. We're going to clean at a regular cadence desktops and other high-touch surfaces so that we are, trying to do as much as we can to avoid any potential contamination. We're going to continue to our cleaning protocols. This summer, we've been in the process of using some of the COVID dollars that Brittany just mentioned to upgrade our HVAC systems. We do use a MERV 10 certified filter, which is what most recommend for different types of HVAC units. We do replace them 3 times a year. We have increased air circulation. Air circulation matters. And so we are replacing classroom air about 4 times every hour. So we're trying to maximize airflow throughout that environment. Again, trying to create as much ventilation as possible. I know my emails to you every morning were annoying. They annoy my wife. So I can tell you that they're annoying. But we are still asking parents that if your child is symptomatic at any level, please keep them home. Just keep them home. Materials will be on Schoology and you will have access to them. So do help us all out and do your daily symptom check. We are going to socially distance to the extent possible to have everybody in person. We do not have an online option available to parents at this time. So we are going to socially distance to the extent possible and have all students in person. So this is probably the area that has changed the most recently. So I wanted to provide a little bit of information quarantine. We are still legally required to contact trace students who have tested positive. So once we are aware of a student testing positive, we go through a protocol where we identify who is a close contact of that student. That is all stipulated to us by the Lincoln County Health Department and the Ohio Department of Health. They create the standards, they create the protocols, and we have to follow them. So Granville Schools is still legally required to contact trace an individual who tests positive, and the social distancing threshold is 3 feet as it was last year. You know, there's a big discrepancy between 6 and 3 feet. It is still 3 feet, like it was last year. Positive tests, regardless of vaccination status, will lead to isolation at the direction of the Lincoln County Health Department. If you test positive, you will get notified by the Lincoln County Health Department, and they will quarantine you or put you into isolation, not quarantine, because you're sick. You will be placed in isolation for a period of time until they determine that you can resume normal function. If a child or adult is designated as a close contact in the school environment, their quarantine status is determined by their vaccination status and their mask wearing practices. So just recently, House Bill 244 was passed that said that schools cannot discriminate against students based on their vaccination status. So the health department was intentionally left off that bill because they do discriminate. That is their job, that's their role as the health directors of the county. So we cannot discriminate, but they can. But what they have said is mask wearing procedures will also be a factor in that contact tracing process. Granville schools, we do not have access to who got vaccinated. So what we will do is we will send them a list of people that we have identified, and they will look at their database to see if anyone's vaccinated, and they will not even contact those people if they are close contact. They just get dropped off the list, and then they will send us back a list of who is in quarantine that's not supposed to report back to school. A person is considered fully vaccinated 2 weeks after receiving a second dose of either the Moderna or Pfizer, or 2 weeks after receiving a single dose of Johnson & Johnson. So if someone gets identified as a close contact, they can't run out and get a vaccination and qualify for the exemption. So there's a couple of layers here. So I'm going to talk about what it means to be fully vaccinated in this process, what it means to be unvaccinated but masked, and then what it means to be unvaccinated and unmasked, because it does get delineated in the contact tracing process. If a student or staff member is fully vaccinated as determined by the Lincoln County Health Department and they are designated as a close contact, they will not need to be quarantined from school or extracurriculars if they wear a mask indoors as much as possible for 14 days, which can be reduced to 3 to 5 after exposure with verification of a negative viral PCR or antigen test result is received, or if they have no symptoms, they're following the protocol, no quarantine. In all these scenarios, if symptoms occur, the student should quarantine, and a positive test will lead to isolation as prescribed by the Lincoln County Health Department. So again, you're fine unless you present symptoms. If you present symptoms, you are going to get isolated because you are going to be considered a probable case. There are some people that will be quarantined or in isolation based on non-school related contacts that happened all the time last year. So somebody had a tournament in Nashville that was not associated with the school at all. We found out later that 5 people tested positive. One of them is a student in Granville. And then we had to work through our process. So it's not just school-related issues that we deal with. If you are not fully vaccinated, but you are wearing a mask at school,
They are treating school environments slightly differently than other environments. If a student or staff member is not fully vaccinated but was consistently wearing a mask, that's why we need to know what your desire is for your child. How are you going to designate your child in that first order? And physically distancing, they will not be required to quarantine from school or extracurriculars. So wearing a mask indoors as much as possible, either 14 days, same as the first slide. Okay, no symptoms, following this protocol, you're still not quarantined. The exception is, remember, lunches are unmasked. So a lot of times when we saw transmission occur, it was during unmasked environments. So lunch is typically an unmasked environment. We try and spread kids out as much as possible. However, there are some circumstances where you could be identified as a close contact because of that environment. So again, in any of these scenarios, if you become symptomatic, you are obviously going to be placed in isolation. But again, if you are wearing a mask and out 3 feet or higher, you will not be required to quarantine if you are not symptomatic. Again, these are the directives from the Ohio Department of Health and the Licking County Health Department. These are not Granville schools. If you are not fully vaccinated and you do not wear a mask to school, you will be required to quarantine from school and extracurriculars for 10 days from the last exposure to the COVID positive student. That can be reduced to 7 days with a negative test, viral test after the 5th day. So you could get that dropped if you go and get a negative test after 5 days. But again, it takes a little bit of time for the viral load to appear, so you have to wait at least 5 days. But in general, you are out for 10 days in quarantine. During that time, you will be given access, just like you always have, to Schoology. It's not a Zoom environment. It is not a separate online environment. You are going to be accessing your information and your learning through the Schoology learning management system and getting that information about your daily assignments through that portal. And if you become symptomatic, then you move from quarantine to isolation, and you continue to fall into that isolation category. ODH created this nice little schematic that I just kind of outlined that says, are you a contact? Were you a contact that was wearing a mask, yes or no? And you can follow the flow chart. Again, this is hyperlinked here in case you want to look at that, not on the screen from 80 yards away. Quarantine overview. Education will be synchronous at home with email, phone, Schoology contact with staff. Again, it is not going to be a Zoom environment at the 7-12 level. Teachers will be, populating content and materials and assignments just like they have always in Schoology for the students' benefit to keep up, and you're going to be connecting with the teachers via those media. In short, masks and vaccination matter related to the quarantining of students and staff in close contact situations. So we want everyone to be crystal clear about that and why that is and who's making those decisions before you make your decision about your child's mask status. Again, close contact for outside of the school environment is a little different. It's more nuanced. Actually, it's not more nuanced, it's less nuanced. You're just in quarantine or in isolation. They are treating schools slightly differently. And then in all circumstances, if you test positive, you are going to be placed in isolation and removed from the academic environment until you are not symptomatic. Transportation, I mentioned this before. We are going back to pre-COVID routing. We have reestablished transportation 9 through 12, and we have gone down to our 0.5 mile radius around the schools. So that is a service that we wanted to restore. We know what kind of traffic it created. We know what kind of challenges that provided for families, and we wanted to get back to pre-COVID routing information. I already shared that masks will be required on school buses. We do fall under the federal rules that are part of mass transit entities, which school buses can be considered. Therefore, we are going to require masks and hope that people comply with those parameters. Obviously, we have one bus driver whose sole responsibility is to get students from point A to point B safely, and we don't necessarily have the ability to enforce and monitor what's happening behind. We want them focused on the road as much as possible, so your compliance with that would be very helpful. Activities, indoor versus outdoor. Outdoor school events, masks are optional unless the entire district has a mask mandate. Okay, so if there is, let's say worst case scenario happens and things get out of control and we have to implement a whole school district mask mandate, then we will comply with that mandate within the outdoor school environment. Indoor school events are different. They will be required to wear, people will be required to wear masks for indoor events. That is also true for visitors who are coming to our school. First of all, last year we limited visitors. We're going to continue to limit visitors, and we're going to say if you are coming in, we want you to wear a mask. We can't obviously ask you for your vaccination status, and even if you are vaccinated, you can carry viral load. So we ask that you wear a mask in the best interest of all the students in the school environment. Recess, masks are not required for outdoor recess at this time. Indoor recess will be based on, the parent's designation that they've identified through the survey that we will release tomorrow. Food service. Last year, the U.S. Department of Agriculture had free lunches for all students, and that will continue to be offered this school year. This is for a traditional school lunch, and it is not for the a la carte menu items that our schools provide. Students will have assigned seats during lunch because we are required to contact trace. So again, a lot of the requirements that you see are a byproduct of what we have to do in the contact tracing process. As always, students should not share food or drink at lunch. That's pre-COVID. You always ask them not to do that. That's just, in general, a bad idea. So that's something that is consistent. Next steps. Parental guardian choice. All families will be asked to fill out a very short survey for each of their children to identify their mask preference for their child for the first quarter. Obviously, things are going to fluctuate. So we thought a quarter would be a relatively short time frame for parents to follow their designation. The survey will be sent out tomorrow via e-parent or guardian email and be due by the following Monday, August 16. That will also help our staff prepare to make sure that everything is in place and they know what your expectation is for your child versus listening to a kindergartner trying to tell them what their mask preference is. So that is something that we are going to require of all parents. If you don't fill out the survey, we will contact you. It is something that we need to have in order to effectively run the contact tracing process. We are going to weekly review Granville data in collaboration with the Licking County Health Department. We will take a very calculated, measured approach in how we address this entire year. It's not something anybody wanted. It is something that we are dealing with, and we're going to continue to deal with in order to provide the best education possible for our students. Any change in mask status for the district will be communicated by school messenger from me. So if there is something that happens that we need to address, you will hear directly from me via school messenger. It will likely not be an entire building. We're going to try and get it as tight as possible so that we have the least disruption to the school environment. So if we have to have a mask mandate for a specific grade level or a specific classroom, we may have to do that based on the data. So again, there's some flexibility that's going to be required there. But you will be emailed via school messenger, you'll get a voicemail from me, you'll know about it via social media, email, and the district website. So, Board of Education, what questions do you have about my recommendation?
I'm gonna move back.
I appreciate how thorough this is, and all the information you give us. I have a couple different questions. One of them has to do with, this was a question someone asked me, I didn't have an answer to, but what will the classroom and the education look like? You know, let's just say if we approve this plan and it's kind of someone walks into a classroom that's 50-50, masked and unmasked, will that change what the educational environment will look like? For example, you know, those younger kids who are doing partner work, or even older kids, and then the small group work and those movement-based activities that sometimes are done with younger grades. Will that be at the teacher's discretion, or will those things kind of have to be pushed aside because we won't have the distancing necessary, and because, you know, 50% aren't wearing masks, or whatever percentage aren't wearing masks, is that still things that would be, something that would be possible?
So it is going to not be normal, like pre-COVID, because we still have distancing requirements. And if we have unmasked students that would potentially get quarantined, we're not going to put them in that situation. But we are going to try and do as much small group as possible, especially at the lower grade levels in literacy that matters. And so we're going to try and do our best to provide those experiences to the best of our ability.
Thank you. So then, again, will teachers have, what will teachers' role be in terms of if they are sort of thinking about PPE for like when you're in a science lab and teachers tell you to put on your goggles and those kind of things because it's the safety, you know, it's safety there. Do teachers have any freedom to make decisions, I guess, around masks as well, because it's, you know, it's a PPE in the classroom, or is it really parent choice? You know, if your child is not wearing a mask and the teacher wants to do a closed activity, it'll just be what it is because it will be to the parents' discretion, and teachers will just have to work with what they have and have to follow guidelines, mask or unmasked.
If it's a protective, I'm thinking of like a chemistry lab or you know, something like that where, you know, we have them wearing gloves and we have them wearing goggles. A mask would be a typical type of, you know, request potentially. And so I can see that still being used for that class period, but it wouldn't be something that would be an enduring expectation.
Okay. So then, again, for like a literacy for a third grader or second grader, that they're doing that probably every day, that is not something a teacher is going to ask a student to do every day.
Exactly. Right. But for like a one-time lab, that could be something that, you know, I could envision happening. Again, we're still working on the nuances of what scenarios might be presented, but I think in general, we've always required some type of level of protective gear in those type of lab environments. So I envision us still doing that because it's a temporary time.
Right, yeah, I guess I'm just gonna be completely candid and open. I just worry a little bit about, putting, this is a board discussion, are we allowed to talk? Should I just ask questions and
Yes.
comments?
No, this, yes, this is for.
So this is okay, okay, all right, thank you, sorry.
We'll have a chance to discuss it before we go on, after it's on.
Right after public comment, okay,
So it's a good chance to ask questions.
okay, so I'm not holding it up. I'm thinking mostly about teachers, but I'll hold my thought until I kind of formulated it, and I hear from other people as well.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Just a comment, if there's, under the plan, there's a parent survey relative to their choice on masking. I think it's important that we clarify in that survey the implications of not being masked relative to quarantine. You know, I think people that listen here, and listen this evening, that come into this are clear on that, but there's a real impact of both vaccination and masking, that parents are making the choice there if there's a survey that they fill out. So, there's clarity in that, I'm sure that's to be developed in last year's work.
The preamble of the survey will have that information available, so when they open the survey, that'll be the first thing they do.
I realized I had one more kind of clarification and question. I'm wondering, can you just remind us all how to sign up for School Messenger? I know I'm on it, but
Okay.
for other people who maybe aren't on it and then don't know how to do it, they don't have to contact Janelle tomorrow.
I was just gonna say, contact Janelle.
Oh, okay.
And she's gonna kill me for that. So,
All right, great, everyone contact
But no, you can go onto our website, and if you type into the search bar School Messenger, you have the ability to, or contact your building secretary.
Building secretary or go on to your district website. Okay, thank you.
Can I have a quick question? You mentioned the cases of transmission amongst students in the schools and amongst student-aged children outside of the schools as some of the data from last year. Could you elaborate a little bit on what we saw within the school with our distancing and our protocols that we had, and what kind of transmission we saw otherwise amongst the community in general, just to kind of give us that background?
So I can say with certainty that in classroom environments where they were fully masked, we saw zero transmission. In cafeterias where they were unmasked for certain periods of time, we did see viral load transmission. So in athletic events, in other circumstances, we saw transmission occur through athletic contests, either school-related or club-related, outside of the school environment. And so does that help?
Yeah, that does help. And I think what I recall from last year is there was a lot of community-based transmission amongst families, amongst those who travel, or amongst other circumstances that really drove the majority of the cases for Granville as well.
I would say at least the first half of the year, most of the positive cases were byproducts of the adult getting sick in the family, either mom or dad or aunt, uncle, somebody getting sick, an adult in the home getting sick, and then that transmitting to the child.
So this has been proposed in part because our data now supports this kind of flexibility, per se. But we should be clear that our data changes and you ramp up and we could go mass mandate. So this is not,
That's my recommendation. If we don't, then the other option is going remote. And that is, I would much rather require students to wear masks than go through a virtual environment. So that would be the next layer of protection that I would suggest we have in a targeted, isolated environment.
but it could go,
But it could happen.
but it could also go largely in a targeted environment.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
We can go to
Yeah.
all business.
Depending on what we're presenting with, absolutely.
Any other questions from the board?
be put in our agenda when we were entertaining public comments. There is a podium down here. If you would like to comment, address the board, please come to the podium and state your name and address, and you can speak for 3 minutes.
Good evening, my name is Jennifer Granville, and I live at 1359 Welsh Hills in Granville. My husband and I, we have 4 children, 2 have graduated, and 2 are still in school. I just want to say thank you to Joe Brown for showing courageous leadership last year and keeping our kids in school. That was, I'm sure, not an easy decision, but the common thread of last year was that you gave parents, you showed the parents respect by giving them choice. You gave them the choice of either sending their kids or keeping their kids home, and you respected the parents in our community, and I think that's very important. We have a wonderful community, just as Jeff has said, and we have to focus on that. By leaving the choice up to parents, that is essential, because no 2 kids are the same. I have 4 children, and they're completely different from one another. But I will tell you about my daughter, who suffered all last year with headaches. Took her back and forth to the pediatrician. We finally ended up at a neurologist in May. She was diagnosed with chronic tension headaches. The neurologist told me that the mask wearing at school contributed to the severity of her headaches. She is now on daily medication, so she can participate in her activities and do school activities successfully. Now, if she were to get COVID, she may or may not get a headache, maybe a sore throat, a stuffy nose, possibly a fever for 1, 2, maybe 3 days. She has chronic tension headaches that require daily medication, and mask wearing makes it worse. And so that is the reason it is important that you respect the parents in our community and give us the choice to determine what's best for our children, not the other way around.
That was well said, thank you. My name is Lance Foley. My address is 106 Sean Court. I reached out to several of you. I want to thank the 2 of you that took the time to respond to my emails. A couple of things. So you've mentioned that you might ask for the opportunity to enforce a mask mandate. And so you shared a graph that's illustrating that COVID cases are on the rise. And I don't think that there are very many people here that would counter that. But you know, there are more statistics that you also might want to look at. And so I'm going to quote you some information that comes from the Ohio Department of Health's COVID website. So there's other things I'd ask you to think about other than just cases rising as you consider, if you would move to a mask mandate. The first thing that I would ask you to think about. So first of all, hospitalization. So current hospitalization rates due to COVID-19 in the state of Ohio and in Region 4. So Ohio is divided into 7 regions. We happen to be in Region 4. Data that I pulled from 8/8/2021, key metrics. Total inpatient hospitalization capacity due to COVID-19 patients. So of all the hospital beds in Ohio that are occupied, how many are occupied by a patient with COVID? And by the way, those could be occupied for another reason, but they happen to be tested positive for COVID. It's 3.6% for the state of Ohio. And in our region, Region 4, it's 3.4%. Let's get a little bit more granular than that. So in Region 4, there's 15 counties in Region 4. When you think about the counties that are included, not only does it include Licking County, it also includes Franklin and Delaware counties, which are highly populated. And I want you to think about the number of hospitals that exist in Region 4. Think about all of the Ohio State campuses, all the Ohio Health campuses, all of Mount Carmel health campuses, all the regional hospitals, the county-based hospitals. Do you know how many patients are in those hospitals in Region 4 with COVID? 171. Now, this is not to diminish the seriousness of the challenges that those patients face, but I think it's important to keep context, because you know how many patients are in the hospital in Region 4 for other reasons? There's 3,708 patients. So I'm asking you to keep in context that not every, that there are other reasons that patients are in the hospital. I would also like you to think about Licking County, since we're talking about the health department. So while I was sitting here today, I got on the Licking County website, and so their most current data is from August the 4th. Currently in Licking County, there are 5 patients hospitalized with COVID. The population in Licking County is 176,862 people. If you do the math, that's 0.000028. And the final thing I would ask on this topic, around hospitalization, please consider that and I've shared this with you before, but for the public, for the time that we have kept track of patients with COVID-19 in the age group of 0 to 19, only 3% of those patients have ever been in with COVID. So I ask you, a question that you should be thinking if you're going to consider a threshold is, are we just going to look at numbers? Are we of people that are infected? Or are we going to think about other key outcomes of that? And another thing I would like to bring to your attention. So the Ohio Department of Health on July 27th published their recommendation that you're working from. And I thought it was really interesting. So on page 4, where they give you the recommendation for masks, it says, last school year, Ohio researchers conducted an evaluation of interventions implemented in schools to help slow the spread of the virus, including wearing masks and distancing. Their research found that wearing masks combined with distance was effective in slowing the spread of the virus. I thought, well, that's really interesting, because I haven't seen the data. And I thought, how can this be proven? Because everybody was required to wear a mask at all times. Anybody that's ever done a study knows that you have to have a control group. The other thing that was really interesting is there was no citation to the study provided, no footnote. And so I thought that was really wild, because my students that go here, if they were to make such a bold claim in a paper, they would be required to provide a footnote. So I called the Ohio Department of Health on the 27th, and I asked them, what was their source? Because I think it's important to look at what they're making their recommendations from. And I was told to review a paper titled Ohio Schools COVID-19 Evaluation Final Report, January 29, 2021. To get to that, I had to go to reference number 84 on their responsible restart. The report is a survey. And I want to read you a key quote from section 9. That section is titled Impressions and Guidance for Interpretation. This pilot evaluation was not intended nor designed to provide definitive answers regarding mask usage and quarantine in schools. So it's remarkable to me that the state would publish something with such authority when their own study states that it's not powered to do so. And the final thing I would like to talk to you about is mask selection, and I've emailed the school about this before. And I don't know if I'm close to my 3 minutes, so please stop me if I am.
You're over.
Okay, I would challenge you, thank you, Jeff. Mr. Brown, sorry. Finally, I would challenge, are you truly planning to implement appropriate compliance on mask selection, hygiene, and compliance? Will you allow single-layer cloth masks or single-layer gaiters? Will you allow vented masks? These do not comply with what's called for in the CDC guidelines, and yet they were allowed last year. I watched it all the time. Also, are you going to ensure that students that are wearing a cloth mask has washed it each day? That's what's called for in the CDC website. Will you ensure that each surgical mask is disposed of each day and replaced with a new one? Also guidance from the CDC. And there's logistics concerns they talk about on there as well. such as transporting the mask. Did you know that they recommend that you transport clean masks in paper bag? So my ask for you, I'm very appreciative of the extra time. I'm appreciative that we have an option. But I just want to challenge you that while there is a lot of media hype around the Delta variant and its uptick in numbers, that there are other considerations. And so when you think about what would be a threshold, that's important. And the final thing that I want to state that I think is really kind of wild. So in this quarantining process, the one thing that's not on there is what if somebody's already had COVID? So you've talked about vaccination status, but what if somebody's already had COVID and they have antibodies? What's the point of a vaccination? To help you develop antibodies. So if somebody's already had the disease, how does that get considered? And if anybody's paid attention, what will happen when you get the list back that says these are the people that you need to quarantine? Basically, that's telling you the people that did not get vaccinated. So I think it's remarkable that that's the way that's going to work. But I thank you for your time. Have a nice day.
Thank you for your time. First of all, appreciate all the information you definitely presented this evening. I just want to confirm that your full presentation will be available online in some form
Tomorrow.
Okay, all right, fantastic, thank you. I realize that,
Frank, can you say your...
I'm sorry, Frank Foster, I live in Granville. I'm not all that comfortable this day and age, giving my address out.
We haven't.
My address is required. You probably give out my address.
No, I'm saying...
Okay. What local date, I don't know if you answer these questions right away or not, or if you're even allowed to, you have a choice, but based on your rule, what local data will you be relying upon, and what will be triggering when you get to a certain point? What will trigger wearing masks at that point, in your opinion? Jeff, I guess give me the authority, give me authority about the board assuming this evening. What will trigger that decision? And I would ask that the board, should you give Mr. Brown the authority to make that mask decision, that you somehow add verbiage that requires your own body to renew that permission each month. You're meeting anyways, that way a non-elected official isn't continuously making a decision that we can't readdress at a particular board meeting. That seems like a reasonable request, that you just confirm his decision each month following that decision. I'm not questioning the decision. Mr. Brown and I agree on many things and disagree on a few, and I have high regard for his opinions on those things. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Chris McKee, live at 250 Timberworth Court. So, to start out with, we know that COVID is not going anywhere, and won't go anywhere because it's a virus. Viruses stay around for a very long time. We also know, based on high school science, that viruses can get through masks, any kind of mask, unless it's a hermetically sealed mask. So cloth masks, paper masks, double layer masks, it doesn't matter. They can still get through that. According to the CDC, the masks that are put out, they want us to wear gaiters, cloths, double layers, triple layers, whatever. They do not want us to wear the K95 masks. Think about that. So having our kids wear a mask is not really smart, because the virus will always be here. We need to get through these times, let the kids be kids, have them make the option, have the parents make the options to not to wear the masks. And based on the data that you guys had from the Ohio Department of Health and the Lincoln County Health Department, I went out there a while back, and apparently we cured the flu because there are more cases of COVID than there are the flu. In fact, it was like single digits. So the data isn't there. You guys need to look at the data more closely to figure out how you're going to make that decision. The data is basically flawed. And some of the other things that you have had questions about, the statuses that you have going on between, or the status that you have that shows how many people have the symptoms. What's the population you have? How many people didn't get it? The PPE that we have, that everybody is calling, that I work for a construction company. PPE is a personal protection equipment. That means that it stops you from getting hurt. Gloves, eyeglasses, hard hats, anything that stops you from getting hurt. Viruses get through the masks. It's not stopping anything. It might reduce it, but not stop it. That's my comment. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Melissa Palakowski. I live at 410 East Broadway. I just wanted to restate a quick fact and make sure I read it clearly. That you stated earlier that in classrooms where there was 100% mask wearing, there was 0 transmission. Is that correct? Thank you, and thank you all for your service. It's been a very hard year. It'll be a hard year coming up, but I thank you for your service.
Hello, my name is Paul Sanchez, 3189 Canyon Road. Board, Jeff. So just a quick question that I want you to consider. Have you considered special education needs of children who need to read lips? My oldest child, who wears a hearing aid, he made it 1 week back, moving back full time. He came back and said, Mom, Dad, can I come back home? Because I can't understand what's going on in class. You see any other considerations because of this, because of that? Did you ever consider that at all? So, since it's going to be full-time in school, which I'm all about, let's think about that for a second. Does my son's ability to get a good education because he can't read lips not matter to you? Let's have a discussion. Thanks.
Bradbury. I'm a former student, 227 Timberland and U Drive. I'm now an adult. So I have a few questions. You mentioned that there was a federal mandate or federal law or something that was requiring you to have kids wear masks while they're on the bus. Do you know what that law is? What governmental agency passed that regulation or law?
The CDC.
The CDC?
And the Transportation Board, National Transportation Board.
Okay. Do you have any long run idea of how long this is going to go on before things get back to normal?
Nobody has that. I mean, I know.
So we're not going to get into a back and forth, but you can ask your questions and we can respond to you.
Okay. And then my last question is just, actually I think that's going to be all my questions for now. The other questions will come back.
Hi everyone, my name is Dennis Apps. I live at 343 Renew Drive here in Granville. I have 4 children, 2 that are currently in school and 2 that are 5 and will plan on being in school next year. I'm actually running for school board right now, so I'm happy to be at this meeting and kind of try to put myself in your shoes and thinking about what are some of the things that I would be thinking about if I were, voting on these issues, and if I were, deciding whether or not to give Jeff the power to, do a mask mandate or not. One of the things that I would think would be at the top of my mind and that I would be considering the most would be the fact that in any decision that we make in life, there are trade-offs. You don't get away without pros and cons to anything. So while I recognize that these decisions are difficult, sometimes I think, unfortunately, we feel like masks decisions are easy when we don't think about the negative consequences that there are for children. And, I would hope that everyone in the school board is putting kids first and thinking about what's best for the kids first and foremost. That's what I'm thinking about. And one of the big questions is, what are the downsides of masks? There's many unknowns. Developmentally, as Paul talked about, physically and medically, as the Valence Villas talked about, there are downsides that come with that. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes we pretend like, hey, what's the big deal? It's, just a mask. And we don't really know what those downsides are. We don't know what the long-term psychological effects are. We do know that, sadly, nationwide, we have lost more children to suicide than to COVID. So I would say that these risks are real, psychologically, physically, developmentally. And I would be taking those very, very seriously. And I also think for every expert you find that will give you one set of facts, you can find another expert that will give you an opposite set of facts. So it's really hard to know what to believe. And I find some of the things I've heard tonight pretty hard to believe, one of which is that there were 0 transmissions for children that were fully masked in classrooms. That just doesn't make sense to me. We don't know the time of transfer in COVID. So if a child comes down with COVID, he got COVID at lunch, not in the classroom. That seems ridiculous at face value. So those were things that I'd be considering, and I hope you're considering them too. Thank you.
My name is Eric Smith. I have a student in the high school, and I have had one come through the system. So, Superintendent, it's good to see you. School board, thank you for your service. Mine is very simple, right? There are 2 types of people in this building. There are employees and teachers, and then there are students. I would like to understand what choice the teachers and employees have, or do they follow a similar path with this, right? As examples and other things to our students. I just would like to understand, is this authority and mandate only towards students, or is it employees as well as custodial or any other employees of the district? So that would be all. If you can answer that, I'd greatly appreciate it. And really do thank you for your service. This has been a tireless endeavor for all of you, and I appreciate you listening to any comments.
So, Eric, to answer your question, the presentation for tonight was about what's happening with students. We are still working with the association to, work on the staff requirements. So we're still in conversation.
Or choices, right? Getting back to a lot of this dialogue is around choices for the individuals and staff. So thank you very much.
My name is Kyle Fleck. I live at 116 Greystone Court. I don't want to be up here. I mean, it causes a lot of anxiety and stuff. But, I just feel that we followed the guidelines of Fauci and some of these guys who are constantly flip-flopping back and forth. Masks work, masks don't work. There was an article in 2008 from the NIH that talked about bacterial pneumonia and how that led to more deaths than the actual Spanish flu itself. And when you think about that, the masks and the dirty masks and what the kids are breathing in throughout the day, we're or the next day if they're not washing them or changing masks. I think we have to look beyond what just COVID may be, and that there are other things that they're getting sick from. How many times have you adjusted your mask since you guys have been sitting up there? Or talking on the microphone. The other thing that really irritated me when I came in is I see kind of a reversal from what we were doing in restaurants. You go to a restaurant, you wear your mask as you go to sit down, you take your mask off. Well, in fact, tonight, before everybody got here, it was the opposite. Many of you walked in without masks on, you sat down and put your mask on. And I'd like to know, is that for theater, or do you wear that on a regular basis out in the public? I realize you guys are in a very tough position. I don't want to be in your position. But we need to be able to make the decision for our children, and I think it needs to stay that way. My son developed a stuttering problem last year, and it was mainly because of masks and all the stigma with the sickness and are we going to be sick and that type of thing. We worked through that, and I would hate to go regress backwards. I would like to play a video, if I'm allowed. It would just be a 1-minute video. It's from a school board meeting in Mount Vernon in Indiana.
No, not at this time. We've been sent the link, so.
Okay.
We'll go to it.
The other thing I would like to draw your attention as far as the positives cases go up, the CDC is pulling their one of their PCR tests, and December 31st, they're no longer going to ask for emergency use authorization. It was in the California Globe. I believe it was July 27th. So these tests are flawed, and they cannot differentiate between the flu and actual COVID. That just like these Delta variants and all these other variants that they're going to come up with in the future, where have you seen that, that they can actually differentiate between the different types of COVID? Has anybody showed an actual study that can tell for certain that these variants are out there and that they are able to test different variants? I just ask you to use common sense in some of these requirements and different things, because this is beyond what we should be going through. And many of us are just willing to roll over, and I am not one of them. Thank you for your time.
My name is Aaron McAllister, 2035 Welsh Hills Road. And my question, a lot of you made comments about what would happen if we need to escalate to a higher degree of mandate or what have you. But nobody has talked about going the other direction, loosening restrictions and throwing this whole thing in the wastebasket. At what point are you going to say we're no longer going to be doing this? Thank you.
I am speaking as a board-certified pediatrician, at the primary care pediatrician in the greater Columbus area. I would just like to reiterate, well, one, we had the best school year that we possibly could, and I think one of the best in central Ohio of public schools that we could. I saw firsthand in my patients how not being in school totally affected their lives, how they lived, it was very devastating to a lot of kids. And I am so grateful that we lived in a community where we came together and worked hard to protect our children. The current CDC and AAP, versus the American Academy of Pediatrics, who we follow their guidelines, is recommending universal masking for all faculty, teachers, students, and visitors to K-12 schools, regardless of vaccinations. I understand that that's a big undertaking. I understand that adult hospitalizations might be declining because adults, people ages 16 and up, you can differentiate 16 and 19, but adults have the ability to get a vaccination. They have a choice to have an extra layer of protection. Our children in grades K through 6 do not have that choice. The only way that we can protect our kids is, yes, by social distancing. But the only way to do it is by having our kids wear masks while these numbers are escalating. The pediatric numbers are greatly increasing. Last week, when I looked at and wrote a letter to the board, over 350 children had died of COVID. In the past week, that number has now increased to over 370. There have been close to 800 children hospitalized at Nationwide Children's Hospital. And now that the cases in pediatric children are increasing, those hospitalization rates will rise because we can't have a vaccine yet for kids 12 and under. I'm asking, as a pediatrician, as a mom of 2 children in the school district, one of whom is not old enough to get a vaccine, that we require masks in at least the grades K through 6 until we start seeing a decline in numbers. It worked last year. We saw it. We did not have transmission in the classroom. We said we stayed home the week after Christmas when everybody was together and not wearing masks and in big groups. We have not tested what happens when we put a room full of partially unmasked people, unvaccinated, in a room. I don't really want my child to be part of that experiment because right now, that's an experiment. I want them to be proactive rather than reactive for when the numbers rise and we're having to send children home and having to send them to children's hospital. I can answer any questions from a pediatrician standpoint with that, but thank you for your time.
My name is Maria Shane. I live at 203 from Top Drive. I have 3 employees in the district. My employees have been asking me if they're going to have to wear masks this school year. We try and keep that open conversation, even though they're young. When I told them that they would have to wear the masks on the bus and that we weren't sure what was going to happen for the school year, this is what their reaction was. My youngest, who is 6, broke down in tears. My 11-year-old ran into his room, slammed the door, screamed in his pillow. And my 4-year-old, of course, is a teenager, and I got the eye roll, and we just went into his room. I hope that you're seriously considering the con of the mental health issue. I know we talk a lot about statistics and data, but what is this doing to the mental health of our children and the long-term effect of that? And is that going to be more down the road than a virus? I do appreciate your time being on the school board, and I also appreciate you giving the parents the respect to have those options, whether their child wears a mask or not this year. I also want to make a point that in the equation where you are not vaccinated and you are not wearing a mask, then you, with that equation, you're the only one that has to then quarantine. Is that right? And if so, are we then sending those kids a message that they're being punished because they're unvaccinated? not to wear a mask, and now they have to go to school at home for 10 days when all their peers get to stay in school. Another then mental health issue we're going to run into again. So I really seriously consider are they truly for the children in the school district? Or are we just looking at data and making decisions based on data? We're not really actually thinking about the kids and the families in this community. One more thing I want to say is that we lived in the school district for 4 years. We moved away and we were in several different states. And then we moved back, we've been back here 2.5 years. And my kids, even with everything said, my kids do feel like they're getting the best education. They live in one of the best communities we could possibly be in. We just need to keep trying to come together as a community and be positive for our children.
My name is Julio Valenzuela. I live at 1359 Welsh Hills Road. And I just wanted to make a quick comment. As a parent will probably vote not to, will probably choose not to mask my kids. I don't have a problem if you decide, if parents decide to mask their kids. I don't have a problem if a staff member feels safer by wearing a mask. I want you to consider that as you make this. You know, it doesn't make sense to me if the masks are so effective, then why can't those parents just wear the mask, those kids just wear the mask so they can feel safe? As opposed to trying to punish the kids. We're trying to make another set of rules for kids who decide not to be masked, whose parents choose not to be masked. I just want you to think of that as you make your decision. You know, if masks are so effective, then let's let the parents, let's let the staff, let's let everybody who wants to feel more protected wear the mask. And let the other kids, and let the other people make the decision for their kids. You know, there's a lot of other things that we are considering as parents besides just, that with the vaccine, it is available to kids our age. However, there's still a lot of data that hasn't come back. So we haven't pulled the trigger on it. My wife and I are vaccinated. We don't have a problem with the vaccine. But we're not there with our kids. But we also don't want our kids to be punished because they choose not to feel like they're being punished for choosing not to be masked. Again, if you wear your vaccine, not the vaccine, the mask makes you feel safer, more protected, go ahead and do it. No one's going to break it. But let parents make the decision for their kids. That's all I have. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kelly Capps. I live at 343 Granville Drive. I have 2 kids in elementary school, and I think Dr. Miller had said there's no test of kids being in enclosed space that aren't vaccinated. But I work at a local dance studio. They don't have masks. They have them all summer. All of these children, all ages, that are not vaccinated, they're dancing together all summer. Nobody's getting sick. No one's getting COVID. There's no cases coming from that place. There are, all summer long, we've been living in the test of people that aren't vaccinated or aren't masked. I just want you guys to consider that when you're saying there isn't any data. Like, I'm living through it right now and watching with my kids, and they're so much happier without those masks on. So just please consider that. But they go on all summer in environments with no mask, no vaccine, and they're fine. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to address the board at this time? That was only a minute. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. I appreciate you being here, and, we like hearing from the public, so thank you for your time. We will move on to the action agenda.
Okay, action item 8.01 is the approval of the school bus routes for the 21-22 school year. Any discussion?
Any questions about busing routes? Any major changes that are pretty much similar to?
Very similar routes to what was established before last year.
We've got back a little bit more normal there. There are changes in schedules at the high school and middle school as well. And now we double routing back the way we've done in the past. That was so successful. Hopefully to mitigate some of our traffic issues. We're never going to be done with those until something fast is done differently on Street and First Street. But it's good to get that back to a little bit more normal.
Any other questions or comments? Sorry. Take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Ms. Dees?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Aye.
Carmen, this one's yours.
The board would like to recommend the approval of a 5-year contract for Treasurer Brittany Triolo, effective August 1st, 2021 through July 31st, 2026.
I'm going to have a few comments on that because I've been very pleased with Mrs. Triolo here as our treasurer. It's a critical role in a school district to be on top of all the financial aspects of it. And since you've been here, I have the utmost confidence in our systems that you put in place and the integrity of all that is financial related to Granville schools. It shows every time there's a monthly report and more of our questions from how. And so I'm very enthusiastic about your contract.
Yeah, I appreciate you. I appreciate you putting things in layman's terms a lot, because I do that. So, thank you.
Thank you again, for wanting to be with us for another topic. Yeah. And looking forward to having you be part of it.
Thank you.
Thank you for making this look good on the hire, so. No, I do appreciate it, but I want to echo what Ms. Shaw was saying is you've helped me to better understand between the type of presentation and you've taken a lot of these financial things and put it into English that even I can understand. So I do, you make, hopefully for the public as well as for myself at least, a lot easier to understand what can be a really complicated issue about school funding. So thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments? Take the roll, please.
Ms. Dees? Aye. Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Congratulations on this strong work. Next item is 8.03, which is the addendum, which is the approval of the return to school plan.
You want to add anything else for closing?
So I just want to reiterate 2 points. The contact tracing and quarantine protocol is a function of the Ohio Department of Health and the Licking County Health Department. We do not create the isolation and quarantine process. We do not have control over that as a board. So I just want to make sure that everyone understands that we don't have the ability to differentiate, as some suggested. We have to follow the guidance, and that's what the guidance has been delivered to us. The other comment I would make that I want to clarify, the zero transmission comment is of the students that were identified as close contacts within a classroom environment, those students did not become ill if they were identified. So can we can say that none of the students that were identified through the contact tracing process with layers of protection in place contracted the disease or the virus. That's what I want to clarify.
That was a really critical and the county health department provided for us, and it's going to become even more so this year with the complexity of the additional guidelines that are on top of it. So we have thanks to the county health department. This year, we need to stay on top of that timing of those things as well. We need to be timely so we can have appropriate quarantine when we have to. But it's great to have that fire question.
I think the other thing that I would reference is several people mentioned thresholds. That's a ongoing conversation with the health department as they get better information systems up and running. So I have a feeling that, those considerations that were outlined related to hospitalizations and other factors will start to weave their way into the decision-making process if we ever have to face that. But that's something that's under consideration.
This is the point at which we're definitely going to have more discussion on this topic.
Correct, yes, we are.
Thanks, maybe that's a confrontation. Thanks, maybe. My kids asked me if they were going to have to wear masks. And I said that was something that was still being worked out. And my son, who is a rising sophomore, volunteered before I could even say I would feel better if he wore a mask. He said, I want to wear a mask. And this is a child who was wearing it like a beard part of last year. But over the course of the summer, for whatever reason, he has become a very strong mask advocate and reminds me when we're going into public places, put your mask on. To the gentleman, and I don't know if he's still here, who asked if we're wearing masks as theater, I came in a car by myself. I walked in. I was not close to anybody. I put on the mask when Cecile came in or before. No, it's not theater. I wear a mask because I think it protects me, but more importantly, it protects you. The only issue that I honestly have with the return to school plan is the fact that it sounds good to say parents ought to be able to decide what's best for their own children, but you're not deciding just what's best for your children. Your decision affects everybody else's child. If you need your child to be unmasked and there is a cogent reason, a child who is getting tension headaches, that is a cogent medical reason not to wear a mask. I get that. A child who needs to lip read, I get that. There are reasons that kids can't wear masks. But most of our kids in school wore a mask all last year. And they did really well. It's just, it just, I feel strongly that we ought to be requiring masks and that it ought not to be, I don't have any problem with giving Jeff the authority to make that call, but I think it ought to be our call, and I don't think we ought to be making it up. That's just where I am with it.
So I have similar feelings to what Steve said. This has actually been a harder decision this year than last year because of all the data and all the information. And I also strongly believe that you should be able to raise your own children the way you want to raise your own children, you know? And so to be able to have that option option for parents is something that I also believe strongly in. However, I spoke with what I did in order to help myself make this decision and lead through the data is I contacted the local pediatricians group that we typically go to in Newark, and those pediatricians recommended universal masking. I specifically asked, would you recommend masking for children who have kind of a low probability, like an asthma type situation where COVID would be really serious for them, all the way up to someone who's immunocompromised. And the doctor said I would recommend it for everybody. Why take the risk? And to be honest, as a, because I come from school board, because I'm interested in education, I have a background in education, I'm passionate about it, and I think about the educational well-being of kids all the time. I think about kids' mental health, especially around COVID and like how they're not seeing their friends and all these kind of restrictions that they had last year. However, when it came to a virus, when it came to what we should do with a whole group of people, and like Ms. Heath said, wearing a mask to protect other kids, not just your own kid, I turned to a doctor to get that information. Kind of like us making the decision here puts the onus on teachers as well. Teachers have to make decisions in their own classrooms. If they're doing those literacy groups in the K, and I'm really thinking about K through 6th grade, to be honest with you. I'm not as concerned with those older kids. So, because they have the option to be vaccinated, and I think they have the developmental ability to make those decisions for themselves in a different way than the younger kids, right? So, but if those teachers want those younger kids to do literacy groups, and you're going to do those every day, and you're sitting together every day, and the teacher would like those kids to wear masks because she feels that that's safer. I just feel like, why are we putting that on the teacher then? I don't want to have to make this decision. It's medical, but I feel like it's a medical decision. So then I feel like that's passing the buck to them. And while I do, I agree with so much of what's in this plan, and I trust Mr. Brown and Mr. Bass' leadership, absolutely. For me personally, I would prefer that there was universal masking, unfortunately, because it's a really hard choice, is what I'm trying to say. But I guess that would be, if I had to lean one way, that's how I would lean.
So against parent choice.
Right.
Against parent choice. And against friends.
We are through with public comment at the moment, so this is more discussion.
I guess I'm wearing a mask to make others feel comfortable, right? I think there's something about thinking about others and building empathy. I'm not necessarily wearing a mask because I think I'm going to get the virus and vaccinated and so forth. And I guess I'm hopeful that we can build a culture of empathy where you're thinking about other people, right? And maybe I'm optimistic along those lines to think that our community will choose to wear a mask when it's important for others, whether that be for medical reasons or personal reasons. And I hope that our community will respect the decisions that individuals and parents make for their families either way. And it's a super hard call for us, right? We kind of rolled the dice a little bit last year. When we were thinking about this decision last year, there was a lot of uncertainty in our community, right? And if there's one thing that's true about this pandemic is the uncertainty, and I wish I had real good data that would predict the future, but it's just hard to come by that because things change all the time. I know there are mental health issues associated with wearing masks. There are mental health issues associated with not wearing masks. Kids and families and people who are compromised truly feel for their health and safety, right? And that's another side of the trade-off relative to mental health. I support the plan as proposed in hopes that we can work as a community to come together, be respectful of each other's decisions, right? And be respectful of the fact that the diversity that we have is to be celebrated,
mindset of what others' needs are, whether those be social, emotional, cultural, or medical, that make your decisions one way or the other relative to wearing a mask. But it's a tough one, right? I have a great deal of confidence in Mr. Brown. I have no issues giving him the authority to change the level of protections that we have for our students as he sees fit in coordination with the data from the local health department, one way or the other, right? And I'm sure that he would consult with us and we'd have the opportunity at subsequent board meetings to make any changes or give any feedback as needed. He's always consulted with us when we're to make decisions like this, but his close collaboration with the health department, his true understanding of what's happening in all of our schools has been fantastic to lead us through this pandemic for the last year. So I have no issue giving him the authority to move forward with that as I see it proposed, but I'm open to other perspectives and looking forward.
I like the plan because it does give parental choice, and it puts responsibility with the parents. And I like what I heard today during the public comments about if somebody wants to wear a mask, that's great. And I think that's really important. If you want to wear the mask, wear the mask. I wear the mask when it's related to my work situation. And if my children were still in school, we'd have a discussion. I would prefer if they wore a mask. But that, as a parent, I think as a board, we are listening to the parents. And we're trying to give as much respect and flexibility in a safer manner. And we're highly recommending. And in the survey, we're going to put out, these are the options that are given if you choose to mask or not to mask. So I think we're trying to share as much information to let parents make as informed a decision as they can about it. This isn't fun. I take being on the school board as a real responsibility, and then all of a sudden they're throwing health issues. And what I didn't know about health, you can put in a thimble. But I think we're trying to take, I've been impressed in the past year of the communication between the Licking County Health Department and not only Granville schools, but every school district in this county. It's good communication. It's probably as good a data as we can get at the time. And one thing Mr. Brown can't say it enough. I mean, we might chuckle about it, how a plan can't be written in pen. And I think if you talk to our teachers this year and the other staff and administrators, they can attest to that. And as parents, you can attest to it. And I think that also goes to what makes it frustrating is we make a plan, and the plan can change 15 minutes later, 2 days later, but that's kind of the nature, I think, of this virus. Something we haven't fixed in our lifetime, so we're all learning. But I think this is a good, sound plan going forward. And just to echo what Mr. Miller said, and to assure people, Mr. Brown is in constant communication with the board. If there is a major shift, it's not going to be made willy-nilly or without consultation to the board members. So I have the utmost confidence that I'm comfortable with the experience working with Mr. Brown in the health department, giving him that, authority, but knowing it will be made with communication and consultation with the school board.
Before you weigh in, can I read something?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. This was in the paper yesterday. The Supreme Court, in response to an epidemic
concerning the safety of its members, the rights of the individual may at times, under the pressure of great dangers, be subjected to such restraint to be enforced by reasonable regulations as the safety of the general public may demand. That was not the Spanish flu, that was a smallpox epidemic in 1905. But this is unfortunately not unprecedented, it is fortunately unusual. But the more we can all do to prevent transmission, the sooner we'll be done.
Virus.
Is this like the
Not how it works.
SARS will go away,
Wait a minute.
right?
Is this as bad as the smallpox over
Just want to make sure that also the COVID cases in Licking County went up 50% this week.
Yeah, from 1 to 2, 1 to 1.5.
And I spent the day looking at the effects of COVID on children online. There was a really discouraging piece about children who have had long-term effects from COVID, who didn't have an initial bad case, but it has affected their ability to function in school, and nobody knows yet how long it's going to last. And just, why can't we do something simple to protect all our kids? I don't understand why we can't do that.
Because it will never end.
So I just
This is not public comment, this is board discussion, so.
Oh, sorry, I just want to point out, I'm actually not here to change anyone's mind, but I just want to, kind of put it out there in the public that here in this room, there have been obviously, people who are on one side of this issue. I know Mr. Brown talked about it, not us trying to not be political and trying to, come together as a community, and we're working on it every day. Everyone's working on it every day, I know that. But on the other side, if we're talking about sides, a lot of people emailed us on the other side. So just kind of behind the scenes, what you all, the public all has not seen here is like the overwhelming amount of emails we got from people who had the opposite reaction. So just putting that out there, again, I don't want to change anyone's mind or your show, but I just want to.
Again, this is not time for public comment. We're trying to have a board discussion around a issue that we're going to be voting on shortly. So if you could please refrain from commenting, we would very much appreciate it. Thank you.
That's all.
I think, Mr. Brown, I was not one times I've called him this week, there are consequences to both sides of this decision, right? And so what we as a board are trying to do is to balance the health and social emotional well-being and educational needs of our students. We care about our students. We care about their health, their well-being. If somebody is struggling with a particular situation in a math, then we need to have a conversation with a teacher or a principal about how to make that better. I just, I struggle. On one hand, I really feel like universal masking is a good way to go, and then, an hour later, I think, well, there are students who have issues with wearing a mask, and it's not without consequences, and Mr. Edwards said there, some social emotional issues related and anxiety related to, both sides of this thing. So, what we are ultimately trying to do is really, balance a lot of needs here. And I think that, our data right now would allow us to start in this position, allow us to start with a mask, highly recommending masks that parent designated what they're going to, have their children do. But if we've learned nothing from this situation, things are fluid. They change very quickly, and we need to be able to change with it, right? And it's a public school, so like nobody's decision is made in a vacuum. Everybody's decision affects everybody else. And so as much as, a parent decision, not to mask your kid, you think it's your choice, it does affect other people, right? So it's not an individual choice. So, I've struggled, well, since we, for the whole entire summer, we knew we were going to have to make some, this decision. So, I feel like we are, right now, our data supports the plan, this plan, and I feel comfortable with it, and I think I feel comfortable with Mr. Brown having the authority to switch should the data support it. I also think it's okay if we revisit that authority on a monthly basis. I don't know if we need to put that in, or we just do it,
We can just do that.
Yeah, we can just do that. So I don't mind that either, because, we'll be checking in. And as Mr. Wolf said, we are in communication with the superintendent all the time. And we discuss things with him, not, one-on-one, like we don't meet behind the scenes because we're not allowed to do that. But, I struggle. I'm not going to, and, I would like, as so many people said, Granville is a small community. There are so many great things about it. I think we need to make decisions that will benefit every student, teacher, coach, family member, community member. We make decisions that will benefit everybody. And we need to be willing to pull together for the benefit of the whole community. And I think we can do that. We did that last year. Cooperation and hard work. I mean, this whole thing sucks. To be completely honest. Sorry for using that word, but it does. Nobody likes wearing a mask. It's not, anybody's favorite thing to do. And we'd like to get rid of it as quickly as we can. So, and somebody mentioned about not, what about going in the other direction? And I think that's equally. Like if our numbers, go away and Delta disappears, we would certainly revisit a mask option. Or what we need to do and require. So, but this is where we are right now. This is what our data shows us. These are the regulations that we have to work under. And, I think we are trying to come up with the best solution that we can. Anything else?
I just want to point out, I think it's important to also point out that no matter how we vote tonight, we still have respect of each other and can walk away knowing that tomorrow we're going to have another conversation again about whatever, what I mean? We're still going to be working on big decisions together for the educational well-being of students. That's even when we disagree.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think that's one of the hallmarks of what's created this makes the school district so great, right? Because we have that ability, despite the diversity in our community, we come together for what's right for kids, right? We respect each other's opinions, and regardless of where your party is or what the politics say or what the news say, in our small community, Granville has continued to stand up for each other and stand up for our kids' education, right? And it's clear that shows, right? We're known around the state for outstanding results. This past year, in the face of a global pandemic, I am so happy that our kids were here. All the kids that we educated, we did as best we can. I wish we didn't have the constraints that we have. It's unfortunate that going into this year that we still have constraints, but we're working our way through it, through collaboration as best possible. I hope we can uphold those portrait of graduate qualities that we expect from our graduates in empathy and collaboration as we approach decisions like this, right? And as we meet others in our community and as kids meet each other in school, to be there for them in whatever capacity is important, right? And again, there's trade-offs both ways with this. Ultimately, It's hard to do with policy, it's hard to do with programming, it's hard to do with plans. It comes down to culture, right, which comes from our families, right, the values that they share with their kids. And although we're diverse in Granville, I am constantly impressed with the caliber of our individuals. And when we get together and speak our minds openly about the issues that we're faced with, we've got a lot of time. So thank you for those comments.
Actually, one question I had about a gentleman who's studying for reading. There are things that we can do to help that, like, if the teachers are wearing clear masks.
Clear masks,
So
absolutely.
that,
That's something that we can accommodate for sure.
right, so if there are other situations like that, there are things that we can do
Absolutely.
to, help those kind of situations.
Yeah, the one thing that I think is unfortunate that I didn't spend a lot of time on is maybe the social and emotional and well-being plan that the administration and staff have talked about. We know we have students coming back to us that have been out for almost a year, taken out a full year, 18 months, and we are staggering the start of the school year. There's a heavy emphasis on, building culture, like Thomas suggested, but also paying attention to the individual needs and the mental health side of the educational experience. It is going to be a significant priority for the schools this year. So I didn't really reference that, spend time on that, but it is something that the administrative team and staff that are sitting back there are keenly aware of. So I just wanted to add.
It's not one of those things that's easy to measure. There's a state score out there, there's an SAT score, there's college scores, there's all these kinds of things that are easy metrics to measure, and Granville does spectacular. But I will say that we've had as much focus on student wellness and both sides of this equation play into that. And it's something that weighs on my mind and I know is respected by all of our administration and board members. It's something that we're keenly focused on in our decisions, but there as well as trade-offs.
I guess I would encourage families that if your student is struggling for any reason, to please have a conversation with your teacher or with your principal. You want everybody to be successful. Right? I mean, that's why we're here. So please don't let a situation go too far without having a conversation.
Or with your school board member.
Or with your school board member.
I'm looking to refer, like, friends come to me and say, and they're, ready to take it to Jeff Brown. Well, let's talk to this person, but we really do have a little bit of just inside information on, like, the organizational culture. So,
Yeah, so we want to hear it. So let us know. Any other questions or comments about the back to school thing? If you will, please.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
No.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Clement?
Aye.
Thank you. Next is the consent agenda, 9.01A through the A. Okay, just a couple of things to highlight. Obviously, we have a nice donation to accept. We have several supplementals. It's nice to see that we have a nice long list of substitute teachers that are willing to come back and work in the schools. That's a good thing. We are receiving the contracts for the Granville Christian Academy employees that we use flow-through dollars to employ. As Brittany alluded to in the new funding formula, that is directly funded to Granville Christian Academy, and those monies will not be flowing through us, so we're rescinding their contracts. I'd like to say with appreciation of service, Max Bertain, Terry Corman, Kelly Wallen, and Tim Morrison are resigning. And we appreciate all of their efforts in serving the students of Granville schools. And we're hoping that you can still accommodate the GHS marine biology class students traveling to Andros Island. Obviously, that is contingent on what we're trying to get board approved. It was board approved and then canceled. And then we're hoping that we can try to get that accomplished.
Is that going to be offered as an extracurricular class again as well
It is.
for new students?
Correct.
So I mean, they're going to love for that. It's a fantastic program. It's held outside of normal school hours in collaboration with another school district. But it's a great experience to get with science credit and science class with the also the possibility of doing the travel to the other side where they do true field studies in marine biology. So it's a great program. And if there's any GHS students that are interested, I encourage you to go to the information sessions, which will be coming up during the school year, and participate in that. And thanks to the staff and administration for making that happen too.
Any other questions or comments about the consent agenda? All right, take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Okay, item 10.01, approval of the July 2021 financial report.
So,
Second.
Any additional questions or comments?
after your presentation is so fantastic, you're running the state changes as well, that are going to be huge benefits for us. So, not financially, but. Everything can do about that, but next week, we're going to have stuff we do that.
But it will be nice to be able to actually explain funding. Take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Dr. Foreman?
Entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr.
Meeting is adjourned.